Welcome back, adventurers, to another episode of the Corner of Story and Game. Today, we're joined by Raven Oak, an award-winning science fiction and fantasy author, and an artist known for their captivating narratives and passionate advocacy within the gaming community. Raven's journey spans from crafting immersive worlds in speculative fiction to navigating the dynamic landscape of game design, all while embracing their identity as a queer, disabled individual. Raven, thank you for joining me.
Thank you for having me.
So we're here today to talk about your various works, so your science fiction and fantasy work, as well as the work you have coming out that I want you to talk about and introduce it for me. But before we dig into the matter at hand, I always like to start with your origin story, as I like to call it. Origin. How do you say that word?
Origin?
Sure, I got it that time. How did you fall in love with writing, gaming, game design, this whole wacky world? What were you like as a kid? What was your journey to today? And what are you up to today? Kind of take us on the ride.
Sure. I like to tell people that I have been a writer since I could hold a pencil because I cannot remember a time when I wasn't telling stories. I also like to tell people that I grew up as a professional liar because I'm paid now to make up things and lie about things, which is awesome. I think for me, stories were an escape. I did not have a traditional upbringing. There's definitely, abuse and some negative things in my past, which I talk about in the book that we'll get to. Those kinds of things, I needed a way to make worlds that were better and make worlds where I could survive and I could be the hero that, makes it to where no one else goes through these things. And so that's what I did. I actually wrote my first novel at 13. It was 350 pages of angsty dragon fantasy, and it's horrible, and it will never see the light of day. But that's kind of where that started. And I came into gaming a little later. I did have a Nintendo, the original NES, but gaming wasn't really something I fell in love with until middle school, probably about the same time I wrote that novel. And I was diving into things like King's Quest and Space Quest, those old Sierra games that were plot driven. You explored these fantastical worlds, and you have characters, the same types of plot lines and character lines that you see in novels. I was seeing in stories and games, and I was in love. I was like, wait, you mean those kinds of escapism can exist in other media? Whoa, it kind of blew my little mind. And so this just kind of been a part of my life. I think that as my storytelling evolved and I got better as an author, my expectations for games changed as well. It used to be that, sure, I loved a good point and shoot, but at the same time, now I want a little bit more to it. I want there to be a reason I'm going and killing all of these characters. Give me some plot line, give me a backstory with my character. And so that's just kind of been my evolution in terms of both writer and gamer, and looking at game design and looking at what I expect and need out of a good game.
I like to also ask, did you play tabletop games, board games, physical space? Did you get into any of that kind of stuff as a kid?
I did in college, but not as a kid. I actually wasn't allowed to. Part of my super religious, crazy cult upbringing means that was very much of the devil. And I think if I'd ever brought any of that home, that would have been a big disaster. So it was not something I ever really explored till later, which is too bad because it's really awesome.
That it is. Yeah, I grew up through the satanic panic, so I was there. Mm-hmm. I understand. 100%. Okay. So let's dig in here. Your identity as a disabled queer author is central to a lot of your work. So how has your personal journey influenced your approach to storytelling and game design?
Well, I believe, first and foremost, that representation matters. We all want to see ourselves in the books and movies and games we play, and I'm not any different than that. And so I think if I had seen myself in various media as a kid, maybe I would have figured out who I was sooner. I didn't figure out, that I was non-binary and queer till in my 30s. it's like that was much later because I was like, oh, hey, there are words for these things. That's what that is. And so I think that one of the best tips I ever got was a saying that said, write the books you want to read. And the same applies with games. Design the games you want to play. And diversity is part of that. And so because I want to see diverse characters in both, that's what I set out to do.
Great. There's a lot of places globally and even close to home where those kind of stories are pushed out or pushed down or banned or illegal in some places. How important is it that we still attempt to at least put pieces of those stories out into the world for folks who are in that situation so that they can see that and learn that and identify and have something to touch?
I think when you normalize the fact that as queer people, we're just people, that disabled people, we're just people. Like, it's not, I don't want to say there's nothing special about it, but in the same way, there's nothing special about it. We are people just like everybody else. And so the way we combat hate and the way we combat, people who would say, oh, well, we don't need that in our town or our library, is by putting enough of it out there that it is normalized. Like, as someone who used to be a teacher, when I look at a lot of the kids in schools these days, a lot more of them do identify as non-binary or transgender. A lot more of them identify queer. More and more people at that age are figuring themselves out earlier, and it's normalized to them to where they don't walk around like, oh, hey, I need to like make this huge announcement, so to speak. It's just what they are.
Mm-hmm.
And I want to get to a point as a society where things like Pride Month aren't necessarily needed, that we can all just be, and everybody's happy with that, and it's normal, and it's just a part of life. Unfortunately, that's not where we're at, and so these kinds of things are necessary, but it's important.
Would you say it's equally important to even just like the small times that you see representation, the small times where it's just presented as just part of the world of a game or a story, are equally as important as the big moments where there's the big reveals?
Absolutely. That's part of how you normalize it. When you're reading a book, if the character just happens to be like, oh, hey, my boyfriend said blah, 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 and then I ran into my ex-girlfriend the other day, and it's just a quick little line. It seems meaningless. It's not. Because the person who's reading that or the person who's playing the game or whatever, they see that and they go, what? Oh. And then the people who are not part of that community go, oh, but this person's just kind of normal. Oh, head scratcher. It gets the wheels turning and the hamster running on the wheel, so to speak, to get them to maybe crawl out of that corner they're in and understand that, hey, it's not that big a deal.
That's important. Okay. So as someone who's as deeply involved in the narrative design, the game design, the gaming culture, writing, can you kind of I like to get into craft. Can you walk us through your creative process? How do you integrate your experiences, your insights into your work, whether it's a novel or game or whatever it is?
Occasionally, I do get an idea that will drop an outline, like a plot line from start to finish in my head, and I know everything. It just kind of like epiphany. It doesn't happen as often as I wish sometimes. So usually everything starts with an idea for me. Some people start with characters. That's typically not my thing. I get an idea for just a mechanic or something unique I want to play with. Then I have to think about, okay, what characters would be a part of that idea? What kind of, existence are we talking about? Something that's on Earth or not? And that kind of plays into that. And I usually do a lot of basically word webs. It's something that is a holdover from both business and education worlds. But, you do your bubbles and you kind of branch out and you get this mess of paper. But in doing so, I figure out my characters, who are the important ones. I figure out some of the plot line. I figure out the themes, what kind of message I want to tell with it. All of those kinds of brainstorming ideas happen. Then I tend to sit down with that, and that's when I start plotting out the actual plot line. How do I get from point A to point B to the end? Then the writing happens. Occasionally research happens before the writing, but usually my research for something mixes into the writing as I realize, oh, I need to know something about this, and I currently don't. And so that's kind of my process for any type of narrative work.
I'm going to put you on the spot and make you choose what's your favorite character you've ever created and what's your favorite design, mechanic, game thing you've ever created.
I think, oh gosh, you are putting me on. So I think character-wise, my favorite character is probably Adelaide from Amaskan's Blood. I think I took all of my sense of injustice of the world and channeled it into her because she's an Amaskan. And in this world, think of him like half ninja, half monk. She's an assassin who has a set of beliefs that drive what she can and cannot do because she literally worships the god of justice. And the idea of these people are to go out and get justice for all the little people who aren't wealthy enough to have a king in their pocket. And that came from the fact that so many people don't get the justice they deserve. You know, something horrible happens to them and our law, our legal system fails them in so many ways. Society fails them. I wanted a way to give power to that. And so I kind of channeled myself and my sense of injustice into that. It was also a nice, to some degree, like a power trip for me a little bit too, because I was like, oh, this person she's killing right now in my head is really this other person that really exists that you know, I don't get that luxury. Yeah, right. A little bit of that in there. And so, you know, I think that's probably my favorite. Mechanics. Okay, that's even trickier. Most of my work with games comes from either teaching or from like tie-in fiction and things of that world. And so with tie-in fiction, I'm not creating the mechanic, it already exists. Yeah. But there's a artist named Jeff Sturgeon who is known in the Pacific Northwest. He's done a lot of work for games as well as like science fiction fantasy book covers and things like that. But he actually paints on metal and he creates these spacey scenes on actual plates of metal, and it really looks really cool when he's done with them. But he created a world where the Yellowstone volcano explodes and it causes the type of world rendering event that basically extinction level for humanity. And people take to the clouds to try to get above the pollution and continue to live. And the people who can't afford that obviously are left on the ground and things happen. He's actually in works right now for a game for this. But he also created an anthology of stories, which I got to play in. And for me, I wrote a story about a particular type of person, which is a scout. And they're these avian humanoid creatures that can tell what the weather is going to do. And so I got to write a story on that, and I got to be inventive with the way that the scouts work in the airships. And I got to play around with a lot of existing Mexican lore, which, as someone who lived in Texas for a very long time, was a lot of fun. And I think that's probably my favorite in terms of that level of design and getting to kind of, I guess, play with something that somebody else has created.
Yeah.
So much fun.
In the same vein, I guess, are there specific genres of fiction or games or whatever that have the strongest impact on your work or your process or your inspiration?
Absolutely. I mean, I would say definitely JRPGs, tabletop RPGs as well. But I remember the first time through Final Fantasy VII, and spoilers for anybody who hasn't played this, Eris dies. When I got to that point, I actually burst into tears And it reminded me of how many times I had cried reading a really good book when a character dies. And I think that that was probably the first game that I realized, holy crud, like you really can make something as beautiful and as in-depth and moving as a book in the video game format. And so I really started looking more towards that type of game as a way to kind of flex my storytelling skills and look at what other creators were doing in that genre and in that media. Because, you know, they tell writers you need to read as much as you write. And you do. You need to know what's out there, but you also learn from others what they're doing stylistically, plot-wise. Like, what are they changing? What are they talking about when they're writing? And so, you know, when I'm writing, you know, I don't want to reinvent the wheel and do something somebody else has done, but at the same time, nothing's original. So, okay, I really like the way this author did this. What if we did it and tweaked it and tipped it on its side a little bit and did something else? Mm-hmm. Oh, that's a really cool idea. That's how we all create. And it's the same as true for games. And I think that, you know, you can learn a lot from studying the craft that's out there.
You mentioned tabletop games, and I'm just curious, what are you playing? Are you a DM? Are you playing somebody's game?
I haven't lately because of the COVID pandemic. I am being disabled. Part of my disability is I have autoimmune issues that make me high risk. Yeah. And COVID almost killed me twice. So unfortunately, I'm not doing in-person gaming right at the moment. I've been meaning to look at some online stuff because I know that there are options for that. But right before the pandemic, we were running a Pathfinder game at home, and you know, I love the flexibility and tabletop RPGs that, you know, if Pathfinder or D&D or whatever, GURPS, whatever you're playing doesn't have what you need, it's pretty easy to modify that and insert various whatevers in there. But yeah, that's what I was playing before the pandemic.
Yeah, there's lots of great online tools. You should get back in the game.
I really do need to. Again, a lot of it is time as well. It's like I only have so much gaming time when I'm also writing and doing other things. So, you know, it's like, okay, how much time do I want to commit to something? But yeah, I think online is a great option. I just need to actually, you know, do it.
Okay, let's pull back into talking about the topic here. That was me. I do that all the time. I just wander off.
Oh, I do too. I have ADHD. It's like, squirrel. Yeah, it's all good.
I took my meds today, so we should be all right. We should stay mostly on track. Navigating both the gaming industry and the publishing, writing fiction, these are difficult industries for anybody. What kind of challenges have you run into? How have you navigated them? What have you learned along the way? What are some of the things that you've taken away from working in these really competitive, difficult industries?
I think the biggest struggle that I've seen is inclusivity. I know that even in publishing, but both publishing and gaming, the industry is mostly made up of cishet white males. And I think, to be blunt, many of them don't like us playing in their toy box. And so even companies that swear they have a good culture, they don't. Most don't. It's difficult for people who are women or non-binary, queer, like that subset of people of color, to break into these industries. We also run into a lot of, well, I have a person of color in my organization, you know, the token figure. We run into that a lot. And I think, you know, we're seeing it change, but in some ways it's not changing maybe fast enough. And so that's definitely a struggle that I've seen. I've also seen, you know, the ease with which companies lay off their seasoned, knowledgeable employees so that they can hire interns for a penny is criminal. And that's something that also needs to change. You know, there's been a lot of talk about unionizing gaming, which I think would be a great thing. But I feel like that needs to also happen in publishing. We run into the same issues in publishing. The Hugos, which is kind of like the Oscars of science fiction fantasy writing, has run into this multiple times where, someone of color or queer author will win a Hugo and people are like, oh, well, they only won because they're whatever. And so we see it. And it's a problem. I think on the flip side of that, something positive is that, as someone who is a former educator, when I see my former students choose to go into either gaming or into writing, particularly when they're women or queer or of color, they go in to buck the system and they're like, I'm going to go in and change it. And I love seeing that. Like, I will say I did my due diligence and tried to give them the realism of, if you go into this, be prepared. Seeing them do it anyway, it's like, okay, there's maybe some hope for the future that things can change, that enough of us are out there fighting this, that, good things can happen.
Wait, is there a particular milestone or achievement along the way that really stands out for you that you're proud of, or you learned something big from? Or
gosh, I think for me, knowing that I have established myself in my field well enough that people will seek me out for their projects is probably the big milestone. When I did the work with Jeff Sturgeon, he's invited me since to edit his art book, which is really awesome. But I get things like that where, some people are like, hey, can you write a story for this? And it's like, oh, hey, I get to play in somebody else's world that I really like. Or, hey, can you, develop this? Can you do this? I love when somebody feels that I am good enough at my craft and accomplished enough that they think of me in that way.
Yeah, that's a big one. That's huge. Congratulations. That's really cool. Okay. Your memoir, Voices Carry, on the horizon, correct? We're getting close. Okay.
August 6th.
What is the date? Yeah. This will be out before then. So yeah, it's on the horizon. I had to check my editorial calendar there for a second. So first of all, kind of introduce it to me. Give me a rundown. Where did it come from? Why is it important you're putting it out into the world? What does it mean to you? And then what kind of themes or messages do you hope readers take away from it?
When we entered the pandemic and I found myself with less time at conventions, less time with people in public, and more time at home, it gave me the opportunity to kind of sit back and look at society and all the events that were going on and unfolding at that time and be alone with my thoughts, I guess, so to speak. And it was in doing that and seeing the shifts and changes that are happening, both in gaming, but also in writing and publishing and in society in general. It felt like this floodgate opened, and all of these stories and things that I had mentioned to people in the past that had been sitting in my head basically went, you're not going to work on this fantasy novel right now. We really want you to write this. And I like to tell people I accidentally a memoir, because it's kind of what happened. I sat down with every, purpose of writing this fantasy novel, and 40 days later, I had a memoir. And I was not expecting it. I was not expecting the stories that came out to be okay with those being public, I guess, so to speak. There is a lot of different things different things that have happened to me, both growing up and as an adult, that, people of power, either bosses, teachers, whatever, were able to put me in scenarios that were not fair, that were not good, and some not legal. And I just felt like now is the time for us to be speaking up about these things more. I guess Me Too a little bit was part of that as well, but more and more we're holding people accountable for their actions, and we're saying, hey, these are not okay things. These are not things we want to see in publishing and gaming and whatever. And so that was the impetus for this memoir. And, I want people to read it, even if they've never read a memoir, or even if they think memoir is not their thing, because I want people to understand, one, they're not alone. Talking about these struggles, it really does help. And it really does help other people realize they're not alone too. But I also want people to know that you're not beholden to someone just because they're your family or your employers or fill in the blank. If something's toxic, you don't have to stay there. You don't have to live in that. And so, I kind of want people to get a sense of community out of it and realize that we're on this pale little blue dot together. So we should try to make this work.
Sometimes I've been told when an author creates a book, they actually learn something about themselves in the process, or they come out of it with something that they weren't expecting from the process. Is this one of those pieces of work that you came out with something new?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, there were things that when I thought about some experiences through, kind of filtered through the adult, wiser me lens, looking back, I went, wow, that was really not okay. I used to know it, okay, it wasn't okay, but there's not knowing, and then there's really not knowing. And so it was definitely eye-opening for me. And holding, there are times where I'm like, I really should have held more people accountable, and I didn't. And so now I kind of am. Sure. And that's, that's part of that. That's part of healing too.
And putting this out there, you're giving people who are fortunately in similar situations, a lens to look through and say, hey, I can see this too. I can stand up for myself. So that's a gift to the world.
It is. It's a hard gift to give, but it's a worthy gift.
So, as a writer and somebody working on games, what advice would you have that you would offer up to younger people following in your footsteps?
Don't let anyone tell you who you are. And don't let anyone tell you you can't create. If you are writing or designing outside of your own experiences, that's okay too. But research. Also, diversity readers, they're a thing and they matter, especially when you're writing outside of your own culture or identity. But that doesn't mean you can't create those things. You absolutely can. Just be aware of what you're doing.
It's a complex area, creating for other voices or other cultures, or it's complicated. If you're going to do it, you want to do it right, or involve the right people, or it is worthy to be done when it's done correctly.
Yeah. Well, it's how we get representation and how, we get the normalization of the other, so to speak.
Yeah. So another facet of the complicated person that is Raven is that you're also very active in writing communities, and you're an advocate for inclusivity in literature and gaming. So, in your opinion, how important is community support like this in someone's creative journey? How important is it in your creative journey?
Community is everything. I am a prime example of it takes a village. Part of my upbringing meant that it was my friends' families that were often the people I sought for advice. They helped raise me. My dad worked many, many jobs, and there were many times where, 6-year-old me was getting myself up and getting myself dressed and breakfast and out the door to the bus stop with no one awake to help. But I was able to do that because others were checking up on me. And so when we talk about community inside of literature and gaming, I think it's the same thing, that we tend to only do well when we all do well. And that means that we have to be a community. We have to respect each other and try to buoy each other. It's just kind of one of those necessities if we're going to survive and the arts are to survive. these things have to happen.
Well, are there initiatives that you're currently involved in or that you're passionate about that somebody else is doing that bolsters these communities?
Absolutely. I'm a hybrid author, and that means that I'm both traditionally published and indie published. And right now, SIFWA, the Science Fiction and Fantasy Writers Association, they're doing a lot of work to fight the stigma that still exists around indie publishing. Back in the day, indie publishing used to be what people who couldn't get published for real did. But that's changed, like, completely. I know traditionally published folks that are actually doing indie publishing as well because of how much that's changed, and the pay's better, to be really honest. So I love that SIFWA has created an indie publishing group underneath SIFWA, and they're actually trying to fight that stigma and trying to show some of the older authors, older generations, that things have changed, and here are all the different ways that they've changed, and here are the perks of doing things both ways so that people can make better decisions about that. And I think that that's part of that building that community, that bridge between what was and what is now, and the people on both sides of that, trying to get us to come together.
Well, that kind of wraps up the talk about advocacy, but something came to my brain while we were having this conversation to tie back to craft for half a second. I'm curious, what is your process? Like, how many words a day do you aim for? Are you a morning writer, evening writer? I'm always curious about how a writer writes.
So before the pandemic, I typically aimed for about 3,000 words a day, and I would start in the morning and I would write till I got to that point. I got COVID twice, and I do have long COVID, which has given me brain fog and various issues that has diminished my abilities. Sadly, I am fighting back against that, but it took me 3 years of the pandemic to get past being able to write a short story to get back to novels, just from the inability to focus long enough. And so that's kind of been a struggle. These days, it's more of, instead of word count, I look at, I want to at least write for 3 hours. Mm-hmm. However many words that is however many words that is. Because when I was focusing on the word count, it was depressing me, to be really honest. Yeah. And I was like, I have to re-examine this. We don't go after someone who puts on glasses for vision trouble and go, shame on you. So why am I shaming myself for what isn't my fault? I needed to, restructure the narrative, so to speak, and say, hey, this is what it is. How do I deal within that?
Okay, well, as I said, that wraps up the crunchy stuff. There's a question that I like to ask everybody who comes on the show, regardless of whether you're a game designer, writer, actor, comic book writer, board game designer, whatever it is you do. The question is, in my opinion, there's a magical space at the intersection of obviously story and game, but improv, comic books, board games, digital games, all this stuff, where people can just hang out. We have a common language, there's a shared fellowship, there's just this magical space. If you agree with me, and not everybody does, but if you do, what is the magical thread that holds that space together?
I think it's a mix of the need for community and our love of story, of make-believe. I think that just in humans at an instinctive level, we want to be around people. We want a connection. I mean, even trolls, they're doing what they're doing because they are seeking a connection, So I think that sense of community definitely holds us together, but also, again, our love of magical storytelling. Where else can you basically play God and create, entire worlds and peoples and civilizations? And I mean, how wild is that? I think that's just amazing.
Is magic. Mm-hmm. A good answer. I like that. Okay, well, we're almost time to head out the door. I do like to do a little quick fire. Just quick little questions, get to know you a little bit better. Top of the head. Don't go too far down the rabbit hole. What are you reading these days?
I am currently reading Escape Velocity by Victor Manebo. It was described to me as Knives Out in space. And I'm just at the beginning of it, but so far, yes, it's been intriguing.
Adding it to the list. What are you playing these days?
I'm actually going back and playing Stardew Valley.
Nice.
Lately, I think with everything going on, I've kind of felt myself drawn to cozy. I don't want something really serious at the moment. And Stardew Valley just had a really large update recently, so I've been like, hey, let's go see what they did and have some cozy time.
There you go. I get all angsty about the relationship choices and who am I going to be with and who am I going to marry, and so I can't. Too hard. I get anxiety. I'm getting worked up just thinking about it.
I play with my wife and we fight over who gets to marry who.
Oh, that's cute. That's bonding time right there.
Yeah.
All right, last one. If your essence was perfectly distilled down and then injected into a game, whether it's digital or tabletop role-playing or whatever, what game or world would that be, and what would your race and class be?
I think it would definitely have to be a tabletop RPG, something like Pathfinder. I like the fantasy aspect of that particular RPG. As far as me, I kind of see myself a little bit in a character I played once that was a swashbuckling Gripply. So for those who aren't familiar, Gripplies are like these intelligent frog humanoids. And he rode into battle on a battle corgi because why not? I have a thing for corgis. And so, I'm not really all swashbuckler, being disabled, but maybe I could be a bard who tells tales of swashbucklers and that would fit. But yeah, I like to think of myself kind of in that way.
Well, all right. Before we head out the door, I do like to offer a little space here to mention things you're working on, what's coming up, things you've done in the past that you want to mention. Obviously, your memoir. Hit me with it. What do you got working, and where can people find it?
Yeah, so all of my books and stories are at bookstores everywhere, but you can get them autographed as well as my art on my website, ravenoak.net. As far as what's coming up, Voices Carry comes out on August 6th, and it's available in paperback, hardback, and ebook formats. So, pick your poison. If you're going to be at Gen Con has brought back the Writers Symposium Anthology, and that weekend you can actually get a special edition there. It'll be available elsewhere later, but the special edition is supposed to be, special. I have a story in it, so you can check that out as well. Cool. And then later this year, I have Amaskan's Honor, which will wrap up the trilogy of my epic fantasy series coming out. So lots of stuff in the pipeline.
Excellent. And I'm at Gen Con, so I'm going to grab a copy of that. And then I'm going to send it to you to sign it.
There you go.
All right. It is time for me to push you out into the cold. But as you're heading for the door, I'm going to give you the final word. Any parting words of wisdom?
Be the change you want to see in the world. It's cliche, but it's true. Don't just write about it. Don't just make games about it. Speak up, fight for inclusion, and actually be the change and vote. It's important.
It seems that the stars have aligned in an ominous pattern tonight, so I'm going to have to close the tavern early to strengthen the wards. But before I send you on your way, I would like to thank Raven again for sharing your insights and wisdom. And to you, dear listener, as always, thank you for taking your seat at the table. Until we meet again, remember, keep creating, exploring, and sharing your stories with the world. Stay safe, Wanderer. Your chair will be ready by the fire the next time you stop in at the Corner of Story and Game.